So there's a story here. Let's back up because the writer is drawing upon a story about a first century traveling subversive rabbi, teacher, mystic, revolutionary who's been described in thousands of ways, who is ultimately executed by the Roman Empire. He didn't have to die, obviously. He was going after something, following something, giving himself to it. And the cross is something that he endured on the way. So let's just clear up that just for a second. All of the he had to die, why did he die? No, he was killed. He was killed. He was executed as an enemy of the state. That's what empires do and did at that time, thousands of years ago. You execute the ones who resist your all-encompassing, totalizing power. But throughout the story, Jesus keeps telling his students he's headed to Jerusalem. Why? Because Jerusalem was the center. It was the heartbeat of the religious, military, industrial, economic complex of his people. Everything in his first century world was stacked on top of each other. Religion, military might, economics, what you would call government, all of it was like one giant, we might say, hairball. Okay, so he keeps telling his followers he's headed to Jerusalem because Jerusalem is the center of the whole thing. And in the center of Jerusalem was the temple, and his people believed their God dwelled in this temple. And the temple had a treasury, and people would give money to the treasury to support the priests who ran the temple. And then the idea was the rest of the money was given to those who needed it. Namely, you had lots of good, hardworking people who were having a harder and harder time holding on to the family lands that they had inherited. So you had debt was a massive issue. You had this massive widening gap between the rich and the poor. You had these corporate landowners who were buying up these family plots of land, and people who had been handed a piece of land, a parcel of land for generations from their family members, in many cases were losing their family lands. So a whole way of life was being threatened. And the idea behind the temple treasury, going way back in the life of Jesus' people, was that there was a way, a safety net for people who were in trouble. And so people would give money to the temple treasury, and then it would be distributed to those who needed it, who were in danger, who needed food, who were in danger of losing family lands, who were in trouble. By the way, central to Jesus' world was an understanding that you have to have a safety net, or people will start falling through the cracks, and then gradually the whole thing will begin to collapse. Now, what happened in his day was the temple was controlled, and the temple treasury was controlled by a small group of elite leaders who were profoundly corrupt, and they were taking money from the temple treasury to make themselves wealthier and not spreading it around and distributing it to the most vulnerable. So a friend of mine was telling me that on the south side of the city of Jerusalem, where the families lived who controlled the temple treasury, they have excavated bottles of wine that would be the equivalent of a $5,000 bottle of wine, like massive, massive wealth. So, by the way, side note, tangent, although there are no tangents, right? I should do a whole episode on that. There are no tangents, ultimately. But like when Jesus turns over, the story of Jesus turning over the tables in the temple, it was actually commanded that there would be tables in the temple because there had to be a way for people who were visiting from other lands to exchange their currency for the currency of the temple so they could give money to the treasury. So there had to be an exchange system. So when Jesus turns over the tables, he has no problem with money changers in the temple. He has a problem with how corrupt the system has been. So it's like guerrilla theater. It's like performance art. It's not the tables. It's the fact that the tables have become a symbol of the corrupt system. And actually, some people believe that when Jesus turns over the tables, that's actually what gets him killed. That act is an open public defiance of the small elite group of wealthy people who controlled the temple and the temple treasury. And that to do that in public, you were just asking. He's provoking them by saying, this whole thing is corrupt. You have forgotten to protect the vulnerable. You are making yourselves wealthier with money that was intended to care for everybody. And therefore, this system needs to come down because it is no longer, this institution has collapsed in on itself and it's no longer doing what it originally existed to do. You